So for months people have been harassing me with questions, and it was quite nice of them, but they were asking me, Chris, what's the holdup with F-35 in Germany? Is it happening? Super Hornets, Growlers, Eurofighters? What are you getting to replace your Tornadoes? Is there finally a decision? And for months, all I could say is, the only news there is, my dear friend, is that there is no news. And then suddenly, my freaking government throws 20 years of shenanigans out of the window and decides that now is the best time to talk about increased military spending and that Germany should perhaps get the F-35. So here I am talking about that. Again. You're welcome. So welcome everybody to Military Aviation History. I'm Chris, and yes, things are happening in Germany. On Sunday, 27th of February, the German Chancellor Scholz went in front of Parliament and delivered a speech that essentially indicated that Germany is going to do a 180 on anything that is related to military spending, foreign policy, security policy, as well as even energy policy. It's quite the announcement. This video is going to be quite raw because things are happening, but I'll break it down from here. But I do want to stress, nothing as of yet has been confirmed. Really, nothing has been confirmed. It's an announcement, it's a speech, it's an indication of something's going to happen. Let's take it as such. But I will explain what essentially was announced and what might now be the result of that. There's going to be quite a few themes here. We're going to go through a special fund that has been given to the Bundeswehr, announced for the Bundeswehr rather. There's going to be things on drones, on FCAS, on the Tornado replacement with Eurofighter, as well as the F-35. So I do recommend that you watch the full breakdown to get the full experience and also the full knowledge of how the political process works in Germany. But if you're specifically interested in certain topics, I also added the annotation or the annotated chapter markings as always. So let's get started. Let's start right at the beginning with the announcement to give the Bundeswehr a special fund of 100 billion euros for 2022. Let's listen in.
Aber machen wir uns nichts vor, bessere Ausrüstung, modernes Einsatzgerät, mehr Personal. Das kostet viel Geld. Wir werden dafür ein Sondervermögen Bundeswehr einrichten. Der Bundeshaushalt 2022 wird dieses Sondervermögen einmalig mit 100 Milliarden Euro ausstatten. Die Mittel werden wir für notwendige Investitionen und Rüstungsvorhaben nutzen.
So right now, Germany's military spending is where? Like at 1.4, 1.5% of GDP. I'll have a graph here with a couple of comparisons from other countries like the US, the UK, France and Poland to give you an idea where Germany stands. Germany spends roughly 50 billion euros a year on the Bundeswehr. That's the budget for 2022. However, the special fund that has been announced is 100 billion, essentially doubling what the Bundeswehr has right now. Now, I do want to say that the way I understand it, the special fund essentially caps it off at 100 billion. So it's not a 50 plus 100, but it's just a top up all the way to 100 billion, which is still a lot of money. Also has to be said that even though Scholz announced this still has to be cleared by the federal budget as far as I understand it. And if that is the case, the parliament also has to vote on it. So there's still the question mark of whether that's going to happen, but the indications are at least there. What's important to remember, however, is that Germany is not going to go on a shopping spree buying new military hardware left, right and center with these funds. These funds are most likely going to be used to, well, plug the holes and make sure that the Bundeswehr has available what it is supposed to have based on what the paper requirements are right now. So this is essentially to get the Bundeswehr back up and running. Well, it is running, but back up where it is supposed to be, considering the capabilities it is supposed to have, and then work from there. Now let's talk about GDP. As you know, for NATO countries, it is a requirement to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. Now, these 2% are actually not linked to any sort of capability requirements. So you could spend all that money on, I don't know, demining equipment. But of course, there's the implication, the assumption, and the intended use to present a well-rounded force. Now, for Germany, the spending has been increasing throughout the years. However, it never really reached that margin of 2%. Here, there is also big news.
Wir werden von nun an Jahr für Jahr mehr als 2% des Bruttoinlandsprodukts in unsere Verteidigung investieren. Ich richte mich hier an alle Fraktionen des Deutschen Bundestages. Lassen Sie uns das Sondervermögen im Grundgesetz absichern. Wir streben dieses Ziel nicht nur an, weil wir bei unseren Freunden und Alliierten im Wort stehen. Unsere Verteidigungsausgaben bis 2024 auf 2% unserer Wirtschaftsleistung zu steigern. Wir tun dies auch für uns, für unsere eigene Sicherheit.
Now this is huge. This is huge. And I'm not necessarily talking about Scholz saying we want to spend more than 2%. No, I'm talking about the fact that he wants to have a special fund added to the German constitution. Yeah, to the constitution. To be honest, I'm not even sure how that's supposed to look like. Now, of course, this does have to be cleared by Parliament. Absolutely. Parliament gets a vote. And there is, as you've seen, or as you've heard, broad applause right now. I think there is still going to be some political bartering going on in the background. But within the ruling coalitions, you of course have the Social Democrats, that's Scholz's party, you have the Liberals, and you have the Greens. And actually in that constellation, it's interesting to say, since this government came into power, that's end of last year, so end of 2021, the Greens have actually been the party that pushed for the most hardline approach against Russia and China, which might be surprising to some of you, considering it's the Green Party. It's not something you would think, although it must be kept in mind that this is hardline for German standards. Well, apparently the hardline standards are changing right now. But within the SPD, that's the party that sort of, you could say, was maybe perhaps most supportive of Russia. Within that ruling coalition constellation, you have seen support and understanding also for the Russian position drop massively due to the second invasion here. I mean, this has really shattered to some degree the worldview that some Germans have. Change the constitution, by the way, Scholz needs a 2/3 majority both in the parliament as well as in the German Federal Council. So this is a big political process. But yeah, I think generally speaking, just to round this up here, the German politicians as well as the public, I mean, this invasion of Ukraine, this war has shocked them. I mean, it has shocked us all, but specifically Germany, because it is like the German finance minister in his speech right after Scholz said, we have woken up from our self-righteous dream. That's my translation. And that essentially says it all. I know people in Germany who until the very last minute thought that Putin is not going to invade, who until the very last minute said that, you know, NATO is kind of at fault as well, or partially at fault for this escalation that is happening, and who expressed understanding for Russia's position and, you know, said that everybody should just calm down and maybe it's not going to be all that bad and so on. And hey, perhaps we should give the Russians what they want so then they're quiet and so on. Now that has changed completely, at least in my social surrounding. But I've also seen very little of it in the media. I've seen very little of it in social media. There is broad consensus right now that what Russia has done has essentially shattered the German illusion that has been going on for the last 20 years, that everything is, as we say, Friede, Freude, Eierkuchen. And in fact, I saw one poll today that said that roughly 80% of Germans are actually in favor of increased military spending now. So this is quite something. Of course, we have to be a little bit mindful of bubbles and where the information comes from, and we'll have to see what the long-term impact is, but there is that. And also beyond that, I do want to say politicians, they have increasingly denounced Russia. Nord Stream 2, so the big pipeline that, yeah, what a great idea that was. But that pipeline is essentially done for at the moment. There's a lot of companies in Germany that cut ties with Russian companies if they have some sort of cooperation going on. Germany has also given green light to all the banking sanctions and the finance sanctions that are now hitting Russia quite hard. And yeah, there's even a football club, Schalke 04, who has cut its ties with its primary sponsor, which was Gazprom. And I don't think I would have ever said this before, but today I'm a Schalke fan. Does Schalke do international shipping? Putin's invasion has completely called into question the whole sort of worldview that Germany had. That is, I mean, Germany had since the Cold War. You can laugh, you can make snarky remarks, and yes, I do think actually that anti-military sentiment in Germany will stay strong. It will become or remain a cultural facet of Germany. However, I do think that perhaps through this crisis, through this invasion, Germans have sort of finally been given a reason to understand why we have something that is called the Bundeswehr, why we have an army, and that this army has not been well equipped and well funded over the last 2 decades, that it's really time to change in certain aspects, that we have to think more about the deterrence value of NATO, the deterrence value of Germany, and also that sometimes out there with international partners, there are autocrats, there are dictators, there are despots, and sometimes they don't care about diplomacy. Now let's talk about capabilities. Capabilities, of course, we have to talk about equipment and so on. And here Scholz has a couple of announcements in the speech as well that were quite surprising.
Darum ist es mir zum Beispiel so wichtig, dass wir die nächste Generation von Kampfflugzeugen und Panzern gemeinsam mit europäischen Partnern und insbesondere Frankreich hier in Europa bauen. Diese Projekte haben oberste Priorität für uns. Bis die neuen Flugzeuge einsatzbereit sind, werden wir den Eurofighter gemeinsam weiterentwickeln.
Now here he seems to particularly talk about MGCS. That's the one acronym that I just cannot get a hang of. MGCS, that's Main Ground Combat System. That is a tank project between France and Germany using a Leopard chassis as well as a Leclerc turret, fusing those together, having a Franco-German tank. Now there's something you wouldn't have expected a couple of years back. And then of course SCAF, or FCAS, Future Combat Air System, and that is being developed between Airbus, Dassault and a couple of European partners, and I already have a video up on that which you should watch if SCAF interests you or FCAS interests you. Definitely worth your time. And this is a big signal, and one that I think Germany desperately needed to put out there, because the French were more and more getting skeptical about the commitment that the Germans had, because FCAS was something that Dassault has essentially the lead on. Airbus is doing, for example, the remote carriers, so the drones and so on. But the French have been wondering whether the Germans are really willing to fund this and go all the way with them. And this is a very important signal there for them. Interesting too is of course that he mentioned Eurofighter, but more on that in just a second. What's the next thing I wanted to talk about? Oh yes, oh yes.
Gut ist auch, dass die Verträge zur Eurodrohne in dieser Woche endlich unterzeichnet werden konnten. Auch die Anschaffung der bewaffneten Heron-Drohne aus Israel treiben wir voran.
Germany and armed drones, Germany and armed drones. If you've seen this video, you know. You know. Okay, so this is something, of course, that has been dragged on for about 15 years now, and Eurodrone is something that has been developed with the French, the Italians, and the Spanish, and was also a drone that is supposed to be armed. It's quite massive. It's a really large drone, 2 engines. I think 2 engines because the Germans wanted 2 engines, if I remember correctly. And there we go. So that is being signed off. Then the Heron TP. Now this is interesting. I'm going to go into my notes here because I want to make something very, very clear. He only says procurement will be continued. Ja, treiben wir voran, which you could say maybe increase the pace of it. Implied, perhaps. I'm not quite sure what he's really saying here. He is not really saying we are getting and arming those drones. What he's saying is we are continuing with our procurement of them. Which, of course, we can now say, well, this is a very strong indication that they're going to make this done as quick as possible, yes. But it's always important with these speeches to look at what has been said, then to read the speech again, because I believe with speeches, the written word is actually the one that counts. So when the speech is published afterwards, and not just hear what you want to hear. And that is, I think, something that I wish more YouTubers and also more journalists would take to heart. But hey, sometimes that gets in the way of a snazzy headline.
Und für die nukleare Teilhabe werden wir rechtzeitig einen modernen Ersatz für die veralteten Tornado-Jets beschaffen. Der Eurofighter soll zu Electronic Warfare befähigt werden. Das Kampfflugzeug F-35 kommt als Trägerflugzeug in Betracht.
I will step in here and say that I disagree with Scholz on this one. For Germany to secure a timely procurement or timely replacement for Tornado, it would have had to sign the contract about 10 years ago. It didn't. That's why we're in this trouble, right? But remember all those videos before that I did about the Tornado replacement? They're all here. Again, I can't retread all ground on this video. Watch all of those. I think they're pretty good. But yeah, it looks like we have a decision. We're going to have Airbus Eurofighters for electronic warfare. That is to replace Tornado ECR. And then we're going to have F-35, based on the announcement here by Scholz, for nukleare Teilhabe, or what seems to be nuclear sharing here, essentially taking over from Tornado IDS. Again, an announcement. Will we see this happen? It's not a done deal, but it's a massive statement. If you remember, the previous German defense minister, actually it's the third one down the line now, Ursula von der Leyen, she essentially said that she was from the CDU, and she essentially said that F-35 is done. We're not getting F-35, it is too expensive, and she even fired somebody in the Luftwaffe because that person had championed the F-35. Then that left her successor, Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, usually abbreviated AKK, who, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the best, if not the best, German defense minister we have seen since Struck, and I stand by that. She was left with that decision, and she of course brought in that suggestion that we can procure Super Hornets or Growlers. And no, Germany did not buy Super Hornets or Growlers. We did not sign a contract for them. There was an expression of interest. Never mind what some other YouTube video told you. We never procured Super Hornet or Growler. Never. And then we arrive in the present with Christine Lambrecht as our defense minister. It's too early to tell what her impact will be, but she did say in December that she wanted to see all the options again. And then of course now Scholz makes this announcement. So strong indicators of what's going to happen, but it's not chiseled in stone. What is interesting, of course, is from an industrial standpoint, Airbus and Lockheed Martin are, of course, also collaborating now with the LMXT. So that's a long-range tanker, which is supposed to be more than long-range tankers, but we'll see, which is based on the Airbus A330. So these two companies are collaborating and are probably okay with sharing the cake right now. But if Boeing comes back into this, Airbus, I think, is going to really throw a hissy fit again. But Airbus essentially got what it wanted. You know, it knows that a electronic warfare version of Eurofighter is going to give them a lot of money, and it's probably going to mean that the Eurofighter platform might also be potentially, that's perhaps the hope, more viable on the export market, although it's going to take a long time until we actually get that version. And of course it also means that there's a little bit more longevity perhaps in the platform as well. And Lockheed Martin, of course they're going to be happy of selling F-35s to Germany. I mean, that would really solidify, especially if all these plans of funding the German army now go ahead, that would really solidify the F-35 in NATO, in Europe. By the way, let me know in the comments down below what you think about all of this. What are your opinions? What are your comments? What are your questions? I look forward to reading those. And also remember to check the description for the sources that I used in this video. They are linked there as always. And also, if you like this content, consider supporting channel memberships, and you will get as perks there early access to videos, sneak peeks, and also we have a Discord server where we have bi-monthly meetings as well, which are really cool to tune into. So if you want to support the channel, check that out. It is completely voluntary, of course. Scholz has essentially made a 180, literally a 180, if deeds follow words, on every single major issue that Germany had when it comes to its military, its foreign policy, its security policy, its NATO involvement, everything. If the implications here are that everything goes ahead as announced, which is unlikely, but there will be some give and take. But if things go into this direction, German foreign policy and security policy and military policy has within 48 hours changed completely. Thanks to Putin. I mean, just consider that for a moment. Okay, a moment's over. So let's move on. When will Germany buy all this stuff? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, let's talk about that political process again in order for me to illustrate that point. Initially, it's going to be about plugging the holes. I already said that, right? And beyond that, we also have a dire need to reform our procurement and our planning process for the Bundeswehr. That has to be reformed. I mean, we have essentially the procurement office, which goes by the name, and it's this long that even I have to look at my notes. Bundesamt für Ausrüstung, Informationstechnik und Nutzung der Bundeswehr. Our acronym for that, by the way, all you Americans beat this. BAINBW. BAINBW. There we go. BAINBW. Yeah, take that, America. You're not going to beat us on acronyms now, are you? But yeah, I mean, that office does have sort of the reputation of being the place in Germany where paper goes to die. That's just the reputation. So that has to be changed, and then we'll see. Also, as I've explained many times before, the parliament in Germany has to sign off on all budgets, which includes the defense budget, which means that for every year there has to be sort of a clearance in Parliament that this is the new budget for the army and this is what we're going to spend it on. Do you agree, yes or no? And if Parliament agrees, it goes ahead. If not, it doesn't. Now, most of the time the budgets do go ahead because there's already been inner party, inner ruling coalition, inner opposition bartering on all of these things. And there's of course also sort of the assumption that a coalition, even if they're individual members in the coalition that dissent, that in the end they're going to vote for a yes in order to keep the coalition intact. It's complicated, but that's how it goes. But yeah, so it's not just in Germany, it's not just that the government says this year we're going to spend X amount of money and that's it. No, the parliament has to agree on it. And beyond that, there's another stipulation in the German law that says that any expenditure for the army that goes above 25 million, yes, 25 million, not 25 billion, 25 million, needs an additional vote by parliament. So really, you have a political process that is quite complicated. And if you know what you can buy for 25 million, it's not a lot. I mean, if we would buy new underwear for every single soldier in Germany, we would probably fall under that. But if you even bought a single F-35, you would already be above it, right? So 40 F-35s, you can do the math, that's going to be way above that margin. And all these procurement things have to be, if the rules stay the same, cleared by Parliament. Which is, once again, just a warning for all of you in the future. If you see any YouTuber talking about Germany ordering the F-35 and they don't mention that it has been signed off in Parliament, then they don't know what they're talking about. They probably don't even know German, so they wouldn't even know how to read up on these rules. But it's your choice where to get your news. Now let's talk about German weapon exports. This is not really something that has been in the announcement, but I think it ties into it and it makes for an interesting discussion. As you know, Germany has very stringent rules when it comes to the export of its military equipment. Essentially, it wants to make sure that weapons are not exported into conflict zones and don't end up being used by any party for conflict, war, or whatever you might think of it. Yeah? Military weapons essentially should stay silent. That's the German export policy in a nutshell, very simplified, you get the picture. But on top of that, every time it sells a weapon, it also demands from the buyer that if that weapon is then sold on, even if it's just a single pistol, if that weapon is then sold on or gifted away to a third party, they have to ask for permission from Germany first. And we're not living in this world where they're just going to do that anyway, and they're not going to ask for permission. Most countries will actually ask for permission. And this has been a huge problem. Some of you might remember there was this case just prior to the invasion of Ukraine, well, the second invasion of Ukraine, where Estonia wanted to give artillery pieces to Ukraine. Yeah, those artillery pieces came from Germany before that, and they came from East Germany before that because they were actually Soviet. And Germany said, no, we don't want you to send those to Ukraine because they're going to be in a conflict zone. And then recently there was also the announcement that the Netherlands would want to send 400 Panzerfaust, well, a couple of Panzerfaust and 400 warheads for those Panzerfaust over to the Ukraine. And there's been a lot of discussion, oh, is Germany going to allow this? Yeah, Germany allowed the Panzerfaust from the Netherlands to go. And they've also now sent 1,000 Panzerfausts, well, warheads plus, the equipment in order to fire those, as well as 500 Stingers to the Ukraine. So that's a big, massive shift that we're seeing. That was completely unexpected as well for a lot of observers. Will this mean that in the future, Germany is going to sell weapons willy-nilly, a little bit French style, to whoever is the highest bidder? No. I think there's still going to be quite a few rules attached to it, but they might be a little bit more open to sell weapons to countries they consider allies or within this sort of NATO surrounding, as well as that maybe be more open about where these weapons can be sent onwards from there. But we will see. Time will, of course, tell. Also, and I probably say this way too late now in the video, but this is sort of a response to a couple of comments I've seen in the short that I posted yesterday. If you are, or perhaps you have already done so, but if you're in the process of now putting a comment saying something like, well, Trump told you to do this, Trump has always told you to get to 2%, he was right, and so on and so on, save your time. You're smarter than that. You're way smarter than that. Because as you know, Every US president, at least since Bush Jr., has asked Germany to meet that 2% goal. Every single NATO country, or basically every single NATO country, has asked Germany to meet that 2% goal. It has been a constant demand of Germany, a constant beg from Germany to meet that goal. And it's not just President Trump that has done so. So you are smarter than this. Oh, well, no, I mean, if you do want to highlight Trump as being the special one out here, that is of course possible, because while he has asked Germany to meet that 2% goal, just like everybody else, he at the same time also called Putin a great guy. And that's it. The times, they are changing. Let me know in the comments what you thought about it. A special episode on the Russian Air Force's performance during the, well, until now, during the Ukraine invasion is going to come up on Thursday on the channel. I've invited a couple of experts as well. They're very busy at the moment, but hopefully most of them can make it. I'm looking forward to having my conversations with them soon, and of course posting that on Thursday. There's also a video coming out on the channel sometime later in March on the Messerschmitt Bf 110. As well as that, I have a video coming up on the greatest airborne operation of World War II. As well as that, another video on, would you believe it, the F-35. So stay tuned for those. Make sure to support via channel memberships if that is your jam, for sneak peeks, early access, Discord server, and so on and so forth. And as always, I wish all of you a great day. Surround yourself with friends and family, especially at times like these. And if you're in the Ukraine, I'm rooting for you.